and I'm going to turn it over to him as we talk about honoring the past and looking toward the future.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Am I on? Not yet. There we go. Oh, that sounds good. Good. Well, thank you all for inviting me to be here. Thanks to Walt. Thanks to the planning committee, everybody who's on the district board, and everybody who came today, who took the time to take a day off and use it to learn more about how you can support one another and encourage one another. That's really exciting. I'm glad to hear of the theme of the conference, and so that's great. I do have one complaint though, which is when Walt invited me to this several months ago, you didn't necessarily say there would be no snow, but I definitely did not anticipate traveling through a couple of flurries this morning as I came down from the Rockford area. So anyway, it is wonderful to be here. Glad everybody made it safely, and I want this time to be as educational and interactive as possible. And so we're going to have moments throughout where I will invite you to turn to a neighbor and share some things, maybe cluster into small groups and share things, maybe think about things as a small congregational group. We'll see how the flow of things go. We've got about an hour and a half or so to work with. We'll take a break probably partway through, just so everybody can take care of whatever needs you might have, maybe get recaffeinated if you need to do that. Christy told me to keep her awake, so that might help too. I'm glad to use whatever resources we have at our disposal. So that's what we're going to be doing today. A little bit more about me. I live in the Lancaster County area now, but like Walt said, I grew up in Arizona. I grew up believe it or not, in Arizona in the Church of the Brethren. I grew up at Phoenix First Church of the Brethren, which is now called Papago Buttes. And I grew up there, was called into Brethren volunteer service, and that brought me to the Midwest for the first time in a significant way. I worked at the general offices doing what is now Faith Expo work camps, and had the opportunity to do that and get to know this area a little bit. A little later, after seminary, I came back to the offices and worked doing anti-racism work on behalf of the denomination, and did that for a little while before, and you'll hear a little bit about this later, but before I went into work and ministry with the Church of the Brethren Washington office. We restarted that office after it had been closed for a while, and then my wife and I traveled to Brazil, where we are working with the Brazilian church starts there. And that's actually where I got to know the McNeils a little bit when we came back for a conference at Peoria, right? What year would that have been? 2005, that sounds about right, yeah. Awesome. So it's been a joy and pleasure of mine to get to know the denomination from a lot of different angles. When we came back, I went to the Elizabethtown congregation in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, and I was there for 15 years. And I'm going to be very honest. I know this is going out on YouTube, but I'll be very honest with you that after 15 years, your pastors kind of get burned out sometimes, right? And so this was in the middle of COVID, and I really felt a call to do something else. And so from that, I went back into some of the work I had done in terms of anti-racism and diversity and equity and inclusion, and I worked with a firm just up the road from here, down the road, I don't know how you'd say it, in Green Bay, and worked with that firm for a while before pivoting into my own small business that I have now. And so now what I do is I work with all kinds of organizations. I get to work with for-profit businesses, I get to work with not-for-profits, everything from daycares, to retirement centers, everybody in between. And most importantly, I think for today, is I get to work with a lot of congregations. I thought I'd kind of left church work behind in a way, but I keep getting reeled back in, is the best way I know how to say it, in the best way possible. And so it's been a beautiful journey for me to kind of see how God has worked with me after I said, God, I'm kind of done with church stuff. And that was good for a while, and I was able to take sort of a Sabbath from that. But now, getting re-involved in church in a number of ways. One of them, and Walt mentioned this too, was through interim pastoral ministries. And so I've just completed one of those, and I just started another one at the Gross Nickel congregation in Maryland. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. So I just wanted to give that background so you know the perspective from which I come. And the perspective from which I come is I love the encouragement theme because I'd like to think that's what I do now as a consultant, as somebody who's working, whether it's in the for-profit or not-for-profit world. I often say, I live to help people be their best. And whether that's as an individual or whether that's as a congregation, I think that's what God always wants us doing. Again, hand in glove with the theme, right? How do we encourage one another? How do we help one another be our best? So, some perspective from me and where we're going today. So, the theme of today is honoring the past, looking to the future. As I talked with Walt about some of the challenges that you all have in congregations, generally, but also specific to this district, Walt was really mentioning how you have this dynamic and how this dynamic exists in a lot of established churches where we have had so many good and wonderful and life-giving things happen in our church, right? So many places where we encountered God in very real ways. But as this cultural change has happened, sometimes our congregations have not always, we'll say, kept up or known how to reach out to a continually changing culture. And so how do we do that while honoring who we are? How do we reinvigorate our congregations while honoring the best of what we know as who God has called us to be? And so that's what I want to work at today. That's what I want to think about today as we think about what it is to honor the past and look to the future. Go ahead and click forward on the slide, please. All right. So thinking about the fruits of our labor, and this is the part where I'm going to, this is not going to be your sit and get, as it's called sometimes. I'm going to have you doing some things, and I'm going to start you off easy, okay? The fruits of our labor. I mentioned that I lived in Brazil for a while, and part of living in Brazil was that I needed to learn Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. And I grew up in Phoenix area, and so I knew some Spanish, what I call playground Spanish, which was mostly how to order really well off of a menu, as well as some playground words that you probably shouldn't say in public. So I had a very limited linguistic background in a sense. And so I was starting from scratch. When I went to Brazil, my Portuguese instructor there said, Greg, did you know, and I was 30, he said, Greg, did you know that every year past the age of 4, it gets more difficult to learn a language? Thank you very much for that encouragement. Anyway, but we did learn Portuguese. And one of my favorite categories of words in Portuguese is fruits. Okay? So you're going to learn some Portuguese right now. You ready? Okay, so I'm going to say it, and then you're going to repeat it, and then you're going to guess what the fruit is. And I'm going to start you with a really easy one. Ready? I'm going to say it, you're going to repeat it. Banana. Y'all are naturals. Way to go. Okay. So you know what that means. All right. Here, it's going to get harder. All right. Maçã. Very good. So you got that kind of nasal intonation as part of the pronunciation. Very good. Any ideas what that might mean? Very good. Apple. Nice. Any Portuguese speakers here? Okay, I didn't know if there's anybody cheating. All right. That was really good. All right, so here's another one. This one's kind of easy too. Manga. What do you think? Mango. Boom. Okay. I'm going to make it harder. Abacaxi. Isn't that just fun to say? What do you think? How'd you know that? Pineapple. just looking at the fruits up there. All right. Pineapple. Abacaxi is pineapple. That's one of my favorite words. All right. Limão. Very good. Lemon seeds. All right. Okay. It's going to get increasingly harder. Okay. Maracujá. Maracujá. Let's hear those R's roll, folks. Maracujá. Perfect. Okay. Any guesses there? Nope. Orange? Nope. Passion fruit. Ding, ding, ding. Walt wins that. Walt visited us when we lived in Brazil. Maybe that stuck, Walt. Suco de maracujá. Passion fruit juice. If you've never had that, you are missing out on life. It is fantastic. All right. Okay, last one I want to share, and maybe the most fun to say, jabuchikabi. Jabuchikabi. Very good. Any ideas what that means? It means jabuchikabi. There's no equivalent. It's a fruit that grows right on the trunk of trees, and you pluck it off, and it's the weirdest looking thing ever, but also delicious. Makes great juice. So I say this to have fun, right? I do this to have fun, but then also we think about the fruits of your labor in your congregation. Okay? Think about through the decades, and I'm presuming a lot of you have been with your congregation for decades, so think about the things that have been important to you and your congregation. Think about the lives that have been changed. Think about how your life has been changed. Think about how you've touched people who never even darkened the doors of your building. All right? So think about those fruits. Now, what I want you to do is turn to a neighbor and just share 1, 2, 3 of those things, right? The fruits of the labor of your congregation. It could have been something that happened yesterday, could have been something that happened 40 years ago. All right? Just turn to a neighbor and share for, we'll say 2-3 minutes. Okay? Fruits of your labor, go for it. All right, start to wrap it up. So I'm curious, I would love for a few of you to just share some of the things that have been part of your congregations and some of the fruits of the labor that you've put in. Anybody, go ahead. Shout it out. After school programs. Yeah, after school programs many years ago. Awesome. What else?
I was able to convince a 32-year-old person who was not wanting to be baptized or be active in the church to be baptized and be active, an active member of the church.
Wow, so brought somebody into the life of the church and into the life in Christ. Thank you, Christina. Who else? Yeah.
We just received a membership person who became connected with our church through the food pantry.
Awesome. So he was just, for those of you who might not be able to hear, brought somebody into the life of the church who got to know the church through the food pantry. Who else? This is great. Mm-hmm. Got the mic coming around now. Thank you.
My husband says I don't need a mic. But we have grown so much. We've always been a very faith-based family. But coming into our church, we got involved with community meals. Because I'm nosy, I started going to different, I went to board meetings, I went to district conference. We'd been in a church family years back. But we've gotten community-minded, and our church of the Brethren in Freeport is a very community service-minded church. We're involved with FACC. Recently, we have checked into something that Freeport's trying to get going right at this point, which happened over the winter time, was the shelter in place when we had some polar vortexes. So unfortunately, it took a while to be able to figure out what needed to be done, but we're getting involved with that. We have our own little food pantry blessings box that we're involved in. And one thing that we're very proud of is that we were able to start back with our community meals this year, which because of COVID we had to shut down. But that's where I first started to get really, really involved. And it's been a great weight loss program for myself, to be honest with you.
Good, thank you.
We're always busy.
Thank you. Good, all right. I just wanted to prompt you all to think very intentionally about all the good work and all the good ministries that your congregations do, right? So with God, we've made a difference in the world, and we want to keep making a difference in the world. We want to have impact on our neighborhoods. We want to have impact on those around us. So let's go to the next slide. So it's not a fruit, but one of my favorite phrases in Brazilian Portuguese is this phrase, e daí. It literally means and then. And then. Okay, so you ready? You're going to say, e daí? So, e daí is also one of those phrases that can mean a lot of different things based on the context. Okay? So, I like to say, you know, I might go to the local pizza shop and bring home an extra large pizza for my family. And I might put it on the counter and walk away for a couple minutes and come back and find my 16-year-old son has inhaled 3 pieces of pizza. And I say, Kai, what? This was a whole pizza just 5 minutes ago. He might say, e daí? Which kind of means, it's kind of like a so what, right? So it's literally and then, but it's also like, so what? What's the big deal, right? What's the big, e daí? What's the big deal? It's all, you know, you might also use e daí when you walk into a room. And you walk in, you say, hey, e daí? Right? So it's sort of a greeting. It's one of those multifunctional phrases that you can use for a lot of different things. I like to say that one of my proudest language learning moments was also one of my worst husbanding moments. When my wife and I, my wife's name is Karen, when Karen and I got in a little spat about something, right? And so, you know how this goes. It's back and forth. It's back and forth. And I finally got frustrated, and she said something, and I said, e daí? Because it also means, who cares? Really good language learning moment, you know. Really bad husbanding moment. Really bad partnering moment for me. So it means all these different things. I want you to think about it today in the so what, or what next, and then sense. Because e daí, I tend to think of it as very much a gospel sort of phrase. Because when you think about the biblical story, when you think about the gospel story in particular, there's always an e daí coming. Right? There's always an and then that's going to happen. Okay, you think about Jesus sending the disciples out. E daí? And then? Right? You think about Jesus healing somebody. And then? You think about Good Friday. And then? Right? We think about our ministries. And so we're always thinking about e daí. And then, when we're doing ministry evaluations, Like I said, I get to work with all kinds of congregations, all kinds of organizations. And so I'm always asking them, okay, you did that. And then? How'd it go? What happened? What's next? How might we need to rethink? What do we need to replicate? Okay, next slide, please. So I'm gonna have you guys click through a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of things on this slide, but let's think about the changes in the church just in the last 10 years. The last 10 years alone. So I want you to brainstorm. Forget what I might have written or not written. I want you to brainstorm some of the changes that have happened in the life of our congregations, in the life of the church, big C, in the last 10 years. What are some of those changes? Go ahead, just shout it out. Internet. The internet is a thing now, right? My goodness. So how does that change the church? Outreach. We're able to get our message out. Yeah. Zoom worship, 100%. And let's just add COVID to that while we're at it, right? So COVID, what a blessing the internet was. We were able to continue to gather, if not in person, at least in spirit, right? And together, see one another. Good. What else? How else has the church changed in the last 10 years? It's getting older. Yep. How else? Loss of members. The numbers are going down. It's indisputable, right? Numbers are going down. How else? Become more accepting. I love it. So we're the good with the bad, right? And more fragmented, right? So by that you mean, I'm guessing, denominationally or even polarization in society, living out in the church? Yeah. How else? So some had a slight gain in membership. Good. All right, go ahead and click through a couple of those. We'll see how attendance, name that one, total numbers, and patterns. So we're not only decreasing in sort of the unique people who are attending any particular worship service, to seeing the patterns change. We attend, even regular attenders, even people who are very committed to the life of your congregation, are attending less frequently. Okay? COVID changes, mentioned a few of those. Virtual church, reduced participation, protocol friction. What does that mean? That means a lot of our congregations have had conflict in the church. Do we mask? Do we not mask? When do we meet? When do we start meeting? When do we stop meeting? How does it all work, right? Congregations leaving the denomination. It's happened and happening. Okay? Movement to megachurch. We're talking a broader societal thing, right? More and more people are going to fewer and fewer churches. So there's not only is the piece of the pie, so to speak, getting smaller, right, in terms of societally the number of people who are going to church, but more of those people who are going to church are going to fewer churches. That all makes sense. Okay? What else? Maybe that's the end. This is one of my least favorites. I shared this list at the clergy retreat, and it's bad news. Only 34% of people rate pastors as highly ethical. So if I go out on the street and I say, FaceTime, speaking of technology, dial them in, let's go. So if I go out on the street and I talk to 3 people and I tell them I'm a pastor, odds are 2 of those 3 people are going to think that I'm not highly ethical. Wow. That's depressing for me as a pastor. Right? But that's the way things have shifted. But so it also tells us a lot about how we need to be repositioning ourselves, how we need to communicate with people at large, how we need to be in the world in a new sort of way. We used to be able to bank on the fact that I could go out as a pastor and say, hi, I'm a pastor, and people would automatically trust me. But church scandals over sex, over money, over abuse, it's taken its toll. Just speaking very plainly, right? Okay, let's keep going. All right, so here's what I want to do. With this idea of IL&WI in mind, I want to share this scripture. And this scripture was one that, if you do the lectionary, I believe it was the lectionary just recently, it's post-Easter, okay? So Mary Magdalene in Gospel of John has just gone, and Jesus was not in the tomb, and then Jesus appeared to her, okay? She runs back. She tells the disciples that. But here they are, okay? On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. All right, next slide, please. There we go. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." So let's just think about this narratively for a moment. Right? The disciples are where? In a locked room. Wait a minute. Mary had just come and said, "Hey, Jesus is alive." And their first reaction was, "We better hunker down." Interesting, right? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I know some congregations I've been a part of have sort of that same hunker down mentality. Right? Because of all the reasons I just mentioned. Right? Jesus is alive. Oh boy, the world's scary. We better hunker down. Locked doors. They were afraid. Okay, so that happens. And then what happens next? Anybody remember from the first slide? Jesus shows up anyway. I love it. Anyway, right? Jesus shows up anyway, and Jesus says, "Peace be with you." Okay? So are you hearing the I-LA-WI, right? Are you hearing the "and then"? So they're in a locked room, and then Jesus shows up anyway. I like that. And then Jesus shows his hands and his side. I'm legit, it's me. And he gives them work to do. He pieces be with you again, one more time, and then he gives them work to do. So I'm alive, I-LA-WI. You got work to do. But he doesn't leave it at that. He breathes the Spirit. Right? I love the imagery in that. Right? It reminds me of God breathing life into the world. Right? In Genesis. And so there's this recreation going on here. So I'm curious, have you all ever been part of something like this in your life or in your congregation? Have you all ever felt like, what's going to happen now? Seems like we're at a dead end. Where's Jesus? Anybody?
It was at the beginning of COVID
Say more.
when we could meet in person.
When we couldn't,
Better than a dead end.
felt like,
Amen.
so COVID hits, what's going to happen? It's a dead end. And then?
And then we had the Facebook worship services, and that was
And then?
in person again.
All right. Who else? Where else? Have you experienced this? Have you experienced the joy and the terror of this in ministry? Say more. Community Bible School. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and is that where you're still at?
Well, then we have what we call kids cafe.
Mm-hmm.
So I try putting that together.
Okay. So you're seeing some signs of life. Good. Okay. Great. Who has a success story? Yeah, go ahead. Pivoting, finding new ways. Good. Yeah. Hmm. Thank you. Anybody else? And then. All right? So, in John, Jesus appears a couple more times, and then the disciples got to work. Right? We wouldn't be here if the story had ended right then, right? So keep thinking, and then. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so it's bad news time. All right? As if the trends weren't bad enough, right? So it's bad news time. And I say it because I want to think about our congregation. I want to use this metaphor of DNA, right? Our DNA is that which we cannot deny. And so I like to think about this as our spiritual DNA. So in our spiritual DNA, we have this attitude of and then. We also, when we think about as brethren, we think about our brethren DNA. We think about who we are as people of service. We think about who we are as people of peace. We think about who we are as people who value the gathered community, and that's where we find Christ. And so those are some things that are part of our spiritual DNA. Now, I sort of say it's bad news because there are some things that are not so helpful that seem to have sort of wormed their way in terms of evolution into our DNA. All right, so go ahead and click the next slide, please. So I wonder if, and you're going to see a D, an N, and an A, all right? Spoiler alert. So denial. I feel like denial has worked its way sometimes into our very DNA, meaning every time something comes up, we have this instant response as though we have no choice. right? So sometimes when I share those congregational trends with a congregation, they'll say, oh, that's not us, right? That's not happening here. I know from talking with a lot of pastors, they feel as though their congregations are in a perpetual state of denial. What does denial sound like in a congregational setting? If you think of a phrase that denial might sound like in a congregational setting, what would that be? We've never done it that way before. Classic, right? Classic. So what's behind that? We've never done it that way before. Why? Fear. the cousin, right? We've always done it that way. Can't? Yeah, we can't do it that way. We can't do that. Okay. Any others? I won't even try. Wow. That's the opposite of IL&WI, isn't it? It's the opposite of then. Won't even try. Yeah. Silence. Yeah. Here's a question. If somebody raises something that might feel negative in your congregation, what kind of response do they get? Now, I'm talking about if somebody in a polite, thoughtful sort of way were to mention something like these trends we've seen. What kind of response do they get? Let's say it's a really good point that they're raising, but people feel like, ooh, that's hard news to hear. The reason I thought of that is because silence is often one of the responses. What are some other responses? We're too old. We're too busy. Excuses. Okay. All right. Anything else on denial? Probably lots to say about denial. We'll move on. Won't fit in our budget. Yeah. How can we ever afford that? How do you do it? Don't feel like we have the know-how. Okay. Y'all are good. All right. Next slide, please. Nostalgia. Oof. Nostalgia. What does nostalgia sound like? Like, give me some quotes of what nostalgia sounds like. In the old days, in the good old days, right? In the good old days. I remember when. That's right. In the good old days, man, they were good because it doesn't seem like anything bad happened in the good old days. Right? That must be true, right? No, it's just how we remember it. Nostalgia can be very dangerous, right? Because when we're nostalgic, that's literally what we do. We pluck the best memories or the ways in which we want to remember it. We bring that to today, but we leave out all the other stuff. And it's dangerous because it makes it sound like anything we do now is a failure compared to anything that happened back then, right? Nostalgia. Ooh. So what is that? That sounds like code. What's that? What's the code?
It means that they fear change. It goes back to.
Why do they fear change?
It goes back to that's the way we've always done it.
Why do they want to keep doing it that way? Pride. Ooh, interesting.
Fear.
Comfort, pride, fear. Say more about the pride. I like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Power. How so?
As long as we keep doing it the way we want to do it, we're in charge.
Kind of cuts the spirit out, right? So I don't know if you could hear, but how'd you say it?
Power. As long as we keep doing it the way we want to do it, we're in charge.
As long as we keep doing it the way we want to do it, we're in charge. Right? Don't have to get very, very uncomfortable when you're always calling the shots, right? That's the opposite of the scripture we read. Okay, good. What else? Tell me more about nostalgia. Doesn't welcome new people, right? So if somebody comes to your congregation and the good old days were always the good old days, meaning today is not as good as it was then, well, what does that mean about me being part of the congregation now? I don't know. Glad to be here, right? Wow, that's rough. What else does nostalgia sound like? I'm not fishing for anything in particular, but y'all are hitting some good stuff.
You're like, I remember when all the pews were full.
I remember when all the pews were full. What do you think that means?
I think when you look around and see a lot of empty spaces in your building, and you feel insufficient, and you feel small in context.
So now you feel small. Probably feel like you're failing, right? Not a good feeling. What else? Yeah.
I appreciate that comment about the welcome to new people.
Hmm.
And another piece that I think is we're asking them to invest in sustaining that history that they don't share.
Yeah.
Why should they want?
Ooh.
They're looking for, we're looking back.
I love that. Could y'all hear that? Really good insight. What else? Okay, next slide. Let's go to the A. Where do you hear that? My way or the highway? My way or the highway, right? Some of the control that was talked about. Where else do we hear arrogance in the church? Christian nationalism, 100%. Where else? Think about any sentence that starts with they. They just don't know what good worship is. Right? As I work with congregations, or even businesses that are struggling, right? They just don't know what good food is. Well, have you thought about changing your food? No, they need to change their taste. It's funny how that sounds ridiculous, right? If I'm talking to a restaurant owner and you say they just need to change their taste, how many times in churches do we hear, well, they just need to learn how to appreciate this kind of worship. They just need to learn, I was part of a congregation and it was always, they just need to learn what real music is. Like what real church music is. Like, and it was somebody who was I'm not breaking any news here, right? Somebody who's resisting changes in music in worship. And so they just need to learn what real music is. And I could tell that person, well, you know what you consider real music didn't start until about 170 years ago. And the church was going a long time before that. So did we perfect music in the 1860s? It's not logical, right? It's not logical. What else? What else do you? They just don't care. What don't they care about?
The things that I care
the things that I care about. They're really important stuff, right? What else? They aren't interested. Ooh, they weren't born and raised in the Church of the Brethren. That struck a nerve. I like it. So other people hear that too, huh? They don't appreciate what we're trying to do. That's always an interesting one to me when a church is trying to do something especially service-oriented, right? And they say, they get angry. They don't appreciate what we're trying to do. Well, what does that tell us? What information is that giving us? Say it again?
I just said bad vibe.
Bad vibe, yeah.
You're welcome somebody.
Yeah.
You're not welcome.
Yep. Yep.
I'm afraid everybody but you was going to do it.
Wow. They aren't like us. Oof.
We're going to think about every one of those statements. So,
Say that again, Dan?
every one of these same statements.
Yeah.
About us.
Yep.
And that even is a lesson they say.
Right.
But, how do we think about the way people talk about the church? What their day statements?
Yeah. And so if the people inside the church are saying that about people outside the church, and people outside the church are saying about that about people inside the church, well, now you just got to the last part of our scripture, right? Remember what it said? Forgiveness? I think it's really interesting that shows up in that part of scripture. Really interesting that shows up in that part of scripture. Like we're going through the narrative of what happened. Like it's packed, it's loaded with all kinds of rich imagery and meanings that mean more than just what happened. And then, wait a minute, now we need to start forgiving one another all of a sudden? That just seems like down-home advice Jesus starts giving out of the blue.
That just made me think when you said service workers get mad.
Yeah.
If getting mad because it's not appreciated, it doesn't have condition.
Right?
And there's a quid pro quo all of a sudden we created. And now we're not doing it for they or them.
Yeah.
We're doing it for us to make ourselves feel better or to gain people rather than just being a condition. Saying, here, here's my law.
Yep. Yep. Great insight. When I would do work camps, I would often say, I would put a ban on it. I'd say, we are not here to help anybody. Because when I say I'm here to help you, what that's saying is I have the power and I'm going to do what I want to do when I want to do it. But when we say, I tried to make it exactly what you're saying, which is we're here to serve. And that means we're giving without expectation of anything in return. That might also mean that what we're doing, we're going about in the wrong way, and we need to be open to listening to that so we can do better. Again, we're back to control. It's really interesting. Where else do we see, hear, feel arrogance? What's that? When people are different. So when people are different, we assume what?
Maybe we're better.
Interesting. What does that lead to as you're thinking about it congregationally?
Assumptions and misunderstandings and alienation.
Good. All right. Ready to move on? Okay, next slide, please. So we are at, how many minutes? We've got another, should we take a break?
Got about 45 minutes.
We're about 45 minutes in. Do y'all want to take a break or you want to keep rolling? Rolling. All right, let's keep rolling. If you need to take a break, no offense. I've had people walk out on me a lot of times. It's all right. All right, so let's talk about our true congregational DNA. That's all our false DNA. All that stuff we just mentioned, right? Denial, nostalgia, and arrogance. That's false. That is not who we are as people who follow Jesus. Right? It worms its way in there, but it's not who we are. Let's talk about a couple of things. It's not the totality of our DNA, but a couple of things, a few things that are part of our DNA. So, dedication. People who show up at an event like this on a Saturday through the snow, sleet, and rain. It's supposed to be spring. Man, sorry, this is a digression, but I'm going to take it. So I grew up in Arizona. My first experience in the Midwest was moving to Elgin to work in the general offices. Now, in Arizona, I grew up in the desert. I went to school in the mountains, but I grew up in the desert. And so when we learned about the seasons, we learned that winter is December, January, and February. Spring is March, April, May, and so on. I got to March 1st, and I was like, all right, bring on spring. It doesn't work that way in Elgin. And then I stayed cold, and I got grumpy. All right, sorry. So dedication. And so you all are here. I know you know others in your congregation who are extremely dedicated, incredibly dedicated to the life of the church, the work of Jesus. Right? We do. Churches are incredibly hard to kill. Do you realize that? Like, churches are closing, but do you realize how far along it has to be? Because of the dedication that people have. This is awesome. This is incredible. Like, if anything gives me hope, it's the dedication that we have to the life of the church. Okay? Now, we need to start thinking about how we make sure that dedication is not just to the life of the church, but is also to the ministry of what we're doing, what our real purpose is. Okay? But dedication. So next slide, please. Oh, spoiler alert. All right. So I cheated here, sorry. On is the N. Purpose. So what do you think I mean by on purpose? Focused, absolutely. What else? Intentional ministries. Yep. What else? We know what we're about. We know what we're about. Okay? We know why we exist. So as dedicated as we are in congregations, sometimes we don't really know why we exist. I remember very clearly when I interviewed at a number of congregations before I accepted the call to Elizabethtown. And I remember very clearly every congregation I went to said something along the lines of, "We want to grow. How are you going to help us grow?" And my response to them it was almost dirty in a way, because nobody knew the answer. I would just say, "Why do you want to grow?" Would you believe that none of the congregations could answer that question? Other than, we want to grow because we don't want to die. Well, so again, thinking about some of the things that draw other people to us and become part of our congregations. Hey, y'all want to join this sinking ship? That sounds like a lot of fun. Here's a bucket, start bailing. Right? So we know why we exist. And that runs the gamut theologically, right? Some people might say solely because we want to save souls. Right? Others might say we exist to strengthen this neighborhood and to be a voice of love and joy in a place that has not much love and joy. It could be a lot of different things, and it is a lot for a lot of different congregations. Your congregation needs to find out what its purpose is if you don't have it, if they don't know, if people can't say it. Okay, and it'll be unique, which is awesome. Okay, so we're on purpose. Next one, you've got the spoiler alert, action-oriented. So I don't mean to be action-oriented in the sense that we're trying to say faith and action, that faith doesn't matter. I think we're often more comfortable thinking about faith, talking about faith, being secure in that, but we often get stuck then when it comes to, well, I feel compelled by Christ to what? For what? Again, going back to the disciples, right? The Spirit was breathed and they didn't say, oh, this is awesome. The Spirit. This is great. We'll just stay in this room. We got the Spirit. They went out. Okay, next slide. Let's keep rolling. So this is not a great slide because there's too much information on it. So I want to take it just sort of bit by bit, and I got my little pointer here. So we're taking this notion of our DNA, dedicated, on purpose, and action oriented. This is our true congregational DNA, right? And on the left, we've got, what's the definition of that? What's the habit? As we think about the habit, what does that look like? Okay? What's the habit of that? And then, how do we get there? And I say getting there because it's a continual process, right? We know that as people of faith, because we're always on our journey, right? We're always growing, we're always evolving as people, as Christians. And so we think about the getting there. So try not to jump ahead too far. Let's just take a look. So I would say definition of dedicated is a servant's heart. So we've already hit a lot of that, right? What does a servant's heart look like? It gives without any particular expectation of return, any notion of return, any quid pro quo. So dedication, that's what dedication looks like. Right? The habit of dedication is a groundedness in God. So we're not doing it just because we always unlock the church every Sunday. Right? We're doing it because we're grounded in God somehow. So when I think about this, my current congregation where I'm interiming is Gross Nickel Church of the Brethren. It's in Mid-Atlantic District. And they just have come through a terrible time with their pastors. So they had a long run of a couple of pastors, a couple husband-wife team who were there for many years, had a very successful pastorate. Then they had an interim for about a year, and then they called a pastor, and it didn't work out. It did not work out. And not only did it not work out, but that pastor figuratively kind of set the church on fire as he was leaving. Okay? Nasty stuff on social media, mass emails to the entire congregation saying this person and this person and this person, look out for them, this is what they're all about. It was brutal. Okay? So, IL&WI. And this is pretty cool. Because that congregation, I walked in, and yeah, they have a lot of healing to do. And I want to help them with that however I can. But the dedication that this congregation has, their willingness to fill pulpit, their deacon crew essentially is doing all the pastoral care in the congregation. It's not a small congregation. I came in as interim. They said, hey, would you be interested in doing this? I said, yes, but I have this other business that I do too. Can I do it half-time? And what that means is I'll only be there half the Sundays. They said, no problem. Dedication, holy cow. So this is what dedication looks like. And getting there is spiritual fitness. Right? I use that word very intentionally. So in about a week and a half, oh my goodness, in a week and a half, I'm doing this silly thing where I am going to start on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. I'm going to run to the bottom. I'm going to hike up the other side. And then I'm going to turn around and do it all over again. Same day. I'm not an elite, athlete. The reason that I can do that, I'm going with some friends of mine. Don't worry about me. They'll be there to carry me out if I don't make it. The reason I can do that is because I've invested the time and the work and the training. Okay? Because I figured out how to do that learning from other people. I built myself up where I got to that point where I could do it. You start with a couple of miles and then you continually ramp it up, taking rest in between, making sure you feed your body properly, although I did have some monkey bread downstairs. We can do the same spiritually as well, right? You don't just magically get dedicated or have dedication to any cause. We practice the fitness that goes along with it. Is this making sense? Okay, let's keep it rolling. So, next, on purpose. So, congregations that know why they exist make a difference. I'm working with a congregation, and they said they were able to claim it and say, we exist to serve families. Now, that might sound like a no-brainer, right? We exist to serve families. Super. And what they mean by that is we exist to serve younger families. So, what do you think the conversation was like for them to get to claiming that existence for themselves? Pretend you're in a board meeting. I know you've all been part of these board meetings. A board meeting, a council meeting. What do you think the conversation, what are some of the things that people might have said before they got to claiming that? Who needs us? What else? What resources do we have to offer? Y'all are offering very positive kinds of things. What are the negative kinds of things do you think people might have said? We need more kids in this church. So, do you think there were any sentences that started with, what about me? I'm an older adult. Does that mean that I don't matter? Right? Who's going to pay for it? How's this going to work? Where's the money going to come from? Who's really going to come? Right? So these conversations are, you all know this, these conversations are very difficult in church settings to narrow your focus to the degree that you know why you exist in that capacity. And we always, here's part of just the nuts and bolts of why this is so difficult. Because many of our congregations have dwindled in number over the last decades. We used to have a ministry that incorporated like this much and this deep. Over time, we've stayed with this much, but just due to capacity, we're now this deep. And that's okay, that's not a criticism, it's just the way it is. So when we start talking about focusing in on a ministry, what we start talking about is narrowing so we can increase our depth. But when you start narrowing, then you start talking about grief, right? Well, it's the we've always done it this way. It's the we can't do that. My fill in the blank, father-in-law, mother, grandpa, whatever, was a part of this program 20 years ago, 50 years ago. It's very difficult work. Like, I'm making it sound easy. It's very difficult work to identify what your purpose is. It's worth it. And we're at a point now, because of societal pressures, where we must as congregations. If your congregation can't do that, you're toast. Call it like I see it. If we cannot identify why we exist, then we're not going to be able to make good decisions as a church body with limited resources. Thoughts on that? Pushback? I'm getting pretty frank here. Agreement? Okay. All right. So we know why we exist. And it goes to that next thing, which is the habit. Right? We have to be able to say no to good stuff. And all these ministries this wide are good. That's good stuff. Nobody's saying it's bad stuff. We have to say no to the good so we can say yes to the great. Have you ever heard that? Very, very much out there. So we have to find out what it is, what we really care about, what we're good at, and we need to go for it. So the habit is to be able to say no, to say yes. Saying no is not easy in churches. Okay? All right. Getting there is the work of focus. Is a work of continually reminding ourselves this is what we're about. When I consult with a congregation, I tell them, you need to come up with 2 to 4 priorities. 2 to 4. That doesn't, so we're not going to like wipe everything off the map, right? But we're going to say there are 2 to 4 things we're working at. Because we can only work at so many at a time. Our brains can only take so much at a time. And what I then tell the board chair is you're going to start every single meeting with those 2 to 4 priorities. You're going to put it at the top of every single agenda that you have, whether it's directly related to that ministry area or not. Because when that church says we exist to serve families, so when the worship committee meets, it impacts their decision. It's not just when Christian Ed meets. When the Buildings and Grounds Committee meets, or whatever your equivalent is, we exist to serve families. So what does our building look like? What do our grounds look like? How do we prioritize our precious dollars? All that stuff. Again, making sense? I'm saying it like it's really easy. This is hard work in a church. This is hard work. Okay. So let's talk about action-oriented. So I was getting there, right? How do we think about this in the life of a church? The definition of action-oriented is that a plan is better than no plan. Duh. How many of us have real solid plans in our congregations? If not, why not? I mean, just it's a very real question. What gets in the way? Yeah, Christine.
I think we forget that plans change and our focus changes over time.
Mm-hmm.
So when what we're doing comes to a natural end, then we don't know how to get to the next.
Yeah. Eat that, yeah. So something might have lived its life.
Right?
It's time to turn the corner and move on. So sometimes we're not good at changing plans. What else gets in the way of a plan?
I think sometimes in the church, people, that is their space. And so if that changes, then they're uncomfortable, and that is their own safe space.
So the church is a safe space, and we don't want to disrupt that, what feels like a safe space to people. A fear? Why is there a fear of planning?
I think a lot of times, possibly the leadership team is good for it, or not. They're concerned that maybe they don't know how to go about planning, or
Yeah.
not actually the mechanics of the plan.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's just how do we do it? Especially if it's something new, right? And that's not anybody's fault. I mean, if we just look at this like sociologists, probably when this building was built, right? Good people went to church. Right? And there's a baby boom. So people were looking for churches. Right? So we didn't have to work as hard 20, 30, 70 years ago. Now, we got to figure out these plans. Right? So, yeah, what else?
We get our own way.
With no plan?
Sometimes the plan gets in the way.
The Plan gets in the way of the plan. Go ahead.
Well, there's this need to have like every single detail without completing start.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Instead of saying, okay, here's how we're gonna start, and we'll develop as we go. I'm not saying that to say that we shouldn't have a plan.
Yep.
I'm saying that sometimes all the details of it, and then we get so bogged down in the details of the plan actually.
I think that's from what I've experienced, that is the number one reason that people don't want to make a plan. It's because they're afraid the plan won't be detailed enough or perfect. Right? So we don't even want to bother. Yeah.
But I think it's also, once the plan is on paper, it gives a commitment.
And accountability.
And accountability. And so, if you're in a comfort zone, anytime you're risk averse. So, the risk is out there that this plan is brilliant, but if we execute, it might not work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, but that's the part of the argument that
Yep.
we're saying, it might not work.
Yep.
What do we do then?
Yep. Absolutely. It might not. And also, some people are afraid it will work. Right. Yeah. Oh no. What now? Yeah, in the back.
As an older member, I know that if the plan goes through, somebody might make me work.
Ah. So the real work of the work, huh? Thank you. Interesting.
I think sometimes you're afraid if you make a plan, you're not able to be spontaneous.
Yeah, that's good. If you make a plan, you're not able to be spontaneous. So a number of the people in this room were pastors, were at the clergy retreat, and we learned a process called Lawson's architecture. It comes from the civil rights movement. James Lawson was a civil rights leader. And in that framework, it's a cyclical framework. And so you're always coming back and reevaluating. You're always assessing, how's the plan going? Where are we going? Is the problem or the solution what we thought the problem or the solution is? If not, do we need to hone in on that a little more clearly so that we can do a better job of what we need to do? And so if we can embrace, whether it's Lawson or other similar types of attitudes that says, we're going to aim toward that direction. Does anybody do orienteering? Right? We're going to aim towards that direction. And we might need to make adjustments along the way. And that's okay. But we know that if we don't have a plan, if we don't have a direction, we know exactly where we're going to be at the end of the day, right? Right where we started. Or lost. Or even more lost. Yeah.
Do you ever find that churches don't want to have a plan because they feel like then they're not being open to the movement of the Holy Spirit, without thinking that the Holy Spirit is
Yeah.
in the process?
Yeah. So the question was, are there ever occasions when the church says, no, if we make a plan, then we're not open to the Spirit? And you were saying, if I can put words in your mouth, that is the movement of the Spirit, is to help us make the plan and then adjust along the way. Make plans, right? Right. Okay. So the habit is you go and do, and then this is the other part. Did we mention this yet? Why people don't want to make plans? They're afraid we're going to fail. It's a lot easier to avoid failure if you don't try anything. Right? Okay. So we go and do, and we fail. When I was pastoring, I said, we actually made it a goal one year, and people did not like this, right? We made it a goal. You see my smile, though. I love mixing up fun. So we said our goal was for every area of ministry to have at least one failure. That was our goal. So when you say your goal is to have a failure, what's the implication? What's the process like that leads to that failure? You try something new. You go big. People did not like it. Took us a long time to get there. And once you fail, you ever failed at something and then you realize, well, that stunk. But what did I learn along the way? Yeah, what's next? How do I do it differently next time? Right? That's part of the process, is that we fail. It's okay. That's part of our theology, right? It's okay to fail. We will fail. We're fallible. All right. So getting there is you're building this tolerance for risk and failure. It's really easy to say that we want to take a risk or that we're willing to take a risk. It's a lot harder to do it. And I know that in many congregations, the risk feels even bigger because you know you have limited person power, you know that you have limited budget, you know that you have limited morale, and so it's easy for that to sort of lock us up and stay in that spot because that feels way less risky. I have a really hard time convincing congregations that if you stay, like let's look at the trend. I look at trends with all of them. Say, what does your giving look like? What does your attendance look like? And what does your participation look like? And if all those are headed downward, for some reason, it's wired in our human brains that it feels safer to keep doing the same thing we've been doing than to try something different, which is really odd, right? If everything is going the way that we don't want it to go, trending down. But it's easier to stay where we are. Okay. So we have like 10 minutes, 10, 20 minutes. Okay. What questions do you have about this? What comments do you have? Well, actually, I want to tell a quick story first. So the congregation that said, we exist to serve families. One of the things they did that was their action-oriented step was coming out of COVID. So going into COVID, they were about to hire a youth minister. And the reason they were in a position to hire a youth minister is because 7 years before that, they hired a director of children's ministries. And so they got to the point where just through organic growth, it wasn't just drawing people in, through very intentional planning, they had that sort of organic growth that came, and some of these kids were, because before that they didn't really have any youth. So they had kids that were becoming youth. And so before COVID, they were getting ready to hire a youth minister. COVID hits. That congregation was, in the words of their pastor, very cautious, which is fine, no judgment, very cautious about COVID precautions. And so they waited longer than most before they came back fully in person. Okay? Guess what the number one thing they did, one of the first things they did when they came back in person? Now the congregation had dwindled to a degree, like most of our congregations did during COVID. Hired a youth pastor. Because they knew what they were about. They knew why they existed. They know why they exist. They hired a youth pastor. How do you think it's going? What? It's going great. It's going great. The congregations who are doing the best coming out of COVID are the ones that went back to who they are. Not necessarily saying who they were, but they understand their purpose. Some of them maybe don't even realize how well they understand their purpose, and they went back to it. Might look a little different, might feel a little different, but they went back to it. And this is just kind of an oh, by the way bonus, is they literally got on the phone with every single person in their congregation, and they said, hey, this is what's going on, this is what we're doing, would love to see you. I'm shocked at how few pastors, leadership teams have taken that step to reach out to their folks, because they're stuck in that notion of, well, if they want to come back, they'll come back. Right? If they want to come back, they'll come back. Or even more negatively, some of them say things like, well, if they don't want to come back, fine. Don't come back. So, we don't need to unpack all the emotions that are wrapped up in that and what's going on there. What questions do you have about any of this, about all this? What additions do you have to this? What suggestions do you have for what this might look like in your congregation? 100%.
Or I think sometimes for failure, and then you get over that fear of it, and I think it makes you a little bit more likely to take that risk.
Yep. As a parent, I told Karen that at one point when this dawned on me, I said, you know, one of the best things I think we can do as parents is teach our kids how to fail. And I said this when I was starting my business, because man, you know what percentage of small businesses that don't make it? And I said, well, if nothing else, I'm going to show my kids that we can fail, and then it's going to be all right.
It's easy to take a risk when you're 100% sure you'll succeed, but not so much if you're not completely sure you won't fail.
And why? And so I'm going to bring it back to this example of the kids. Why is it so easy for me to say, oh, hey, kids, try this. You might fail, but it'll be okay. What about you, Dad? Well, you know, I got this and I got that. You know, we adult away all the reasons why we shouldn't take a risk. But we see all the potential in them, right? So we're saying, you could take a risk. You can do it. Go for it. Wonder if we brought that attitude to our churches. I saw another hand somewhere. Yeah, Jonathan.
So when we're talking about being there, which actually brings it over to cause for risk, failure, I think of that as a component of resilience.
Ah,
Right now, education,
yeah.
because there's a lot of things that people are going through, all the changes. How we build resilience so that if we fail, we don't have to bounce back.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. Thank you. Well, so just real quickly, what would you say is the most important part of resilience? Or an important part, not time to be, yeah.
I think it goes back to that dedication.
Okay.
Going about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I just totally failed at this.
Right.
Okay, this didn't work, but I have this purpose that I can do.
Yep. Yep. Good. So if I keep moving and at least in the general direction of who I know I am. Phyllis, you got
So part of what's been done from here is this notion of failure. You know, on a scale of 10,
Hmm.
you know, we logged the one who got the 10. But what happened to 9?
Hmm.
To 8?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't seem to pay attention that this is where the potential is as well.
Hmm.
And we don't pay any attention. And they feel like if they're like a 3, and they're not, they're 9.
Hmm.
So how do we embrace, because there's a lot of attention to the tents, that they get scholarships, they get,
Yeah, yeah.
But what happens in the 7, 8, 9? How do we get them to understand that they have spent movements to make,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not failing?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, as a society here, we tend to do this all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Our youth is, they're failing that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, we get that, they're on good. Excuse me, you're a 9. We missed like, what 5?
Yeah.
Those tests are really illusion, they're not really advantage. Well, yeah, but the perception is there, right? That they are still the top of the scale. They're still the ones who quote unquote made it. But then the guy sitting next to them, the girl sitting next to them, you know, instead of being a 10, they're like 9.8. What happened to 9.8? Did 9.8 fail? No, they missed it by 0.2. And like you said, don't.
Yeah.
Use a sports analogy for that too, like the NCAA tournament. I mean, number 1, that's all. Number 2 doesn't matter. That's what we're gonna do.
Yeah. It's like the
You see that in sports all the time. And it's still.
they don't make big foam fingers that say we're number 2, do they?
I think, too, the idea of encouragement in that too, because I think one of the things that failure
Hmm.
can teach us, we fail, we don't have to die. You know, but it can still, if we don't have people around us to encourage us, and if we only have people around us to call out our failure, then the failure begins to become who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it defines us, and if we can learn to live with the fact that failure doesn't define me. When I fail, but that means that we have to have people around us that will encourage us through that,
Yeah.
remind us of that, because you can feel that way sometimes. And if we have people around us who generally just
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things. And what happens is we become very fearful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because people that we love and people that are around us are calling out that rather than helping encourage us to be successful. So,
Yeah.
I think we can all be more encouraging around those kinds of things that then give people permission to go because, you're gonna try new things.
Yeah. So if you made a mistake. Idai.
So is it a mistake? Or is it an opportunity?
Yeah.
And improve? Because I think how that gets approached also makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the reason why many of us, and I think ultimately, we have a hard time evaluating a program that did not work.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a mistake.
Right.
What are the ways in which we could have done things differently maybe, or tried a different way that it might work? And I think we have a hard time doing that.
We do.
Because we seem to say that it wasn't fair.
Yep.
And we didn't fail, we didn't approach it correctly.
And that is so countercultural that we got to bake it in. We have to bake it into our congregations. And I've heard it said well that you might make a mistake, but you're not a mistake. Right? So how do we make mistakes and then keep going? Recognizing this big picture. Yeah, David. Hurts. We try harder.
What in medicine is I didn't
Yeah.
I learned like a house.
Not to do it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Yeah, we modify. Time is pretty much up. No, Walt? We got a few more minutes. Soon? Soon? Oh, yeah, we got a few more minutes. So, what's that? Another few? So, I want to be as encouraging as I can to you all today, right? I've named some hard stuff. I've named some things that are difficult to do, admittedly. But I'm also here to tell you that you can do it, that I see congregations doing this, that I see organizations, not-for-profits and for-profits, doing this hard work. Congregations have it a little harder than these other groups do because they have more turnover, right? Whether it's a business or most not-for-profits, they have more turnover. And so it is a lot harder to shift an organization that has deeper roots, right? Because we're so used to doing those things. That said, it can be done, and it is being done by a lot of folks out there. I'm seeing congregations turn around what they thought was, only years from having to close their doors. And so it is very much possible. So in the word, in the French breakdown, thank you for that. I want to give you heart that you can do it. It's going to take all these things. But you can do it. And we're Christians, right? We're people who believe that the impossible can become possible. That the hardest turnarounds can become turnarounds. What other questions do you have? We just got a few more minutes, might as well. Or comments. So I'm around the rest of today. I'm going to do a couple of insight sessions, and it's pretty much going to be, I would like in those insight sessions, I would love for those to be practical workshop kinds of opportunities for us to start looking at your ministries and breaking down maybe some of the initial steps that you might be able to take if you're interested in this kind of transformation for your congregation. If you want to start doing this, well, how do we start doing it? And we can share with one another in that context. So I'll be here for that. I'll also be here for lunch, trying to make healthy choices as I get ready for my canyon run. But I'm not expecting perfection from myself. I'm sure there's a great dessert or two down there. So please feel free to ask me if you have any questions. I made a mistake and didn't bring enough cards with my information on it, but Walt's got my information. I'd be glad to share my information with you if you want to talk any further. And even if you just want to chat over lunch or wherever, I would love to continue the conversation. So thank you. Thanks for all your great feedback and insight today. Really have appreciated it. It's been fun for me, and appreciate it. Let's keep encouraging one another together. This is awesome. Thank you.